We're just getting the tech sorted and we'll start in a minute. Thank you so much to those of you who are joining us to be part of this chat on the Zoom meeting. And I just want to acknowledge as well all the wonderful people that are joining us live on Facebook. If you're watching on Facebook and you're joining us, we are monitoring the chat, so feel free to add in any comments. To those of you who have joined us via Zoom, thank you for being here with us. It's lovely to be able to see your faces as we meet remotely. I guess I should start by introducing myself. I'm Jenny Leong. I'm the Greens MP for Newtown, and I'm also the New South Wales Greens housing spokesperson. And before I do anything else, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm here in the heart of Newtown, which is on Gadigal land. It's unceded land. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land, and I want to pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, recognising that this land was stolen and that the fight and struggle for First Nations justice and for treaties and for sovereignty continues. I'm sure that everyone else, thank you, Sally, for putting it in the chat. Please feel free to acknowledge in the comments of the chat what country you're joining from, so that everyone can know where across the state of New South Wales, potentially across the country, you're joining from this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I am so excited and humbled by the amazing powerhouse of women that we have joining us to speak tonight on what is a huge challenge that faces us, and as a local community up north, but also as a global community. I want to start by just simply introducing these amazing women. My friend and Greens colleague, the New South Wales Lower House MP Tamara Smith, who's the member for Ballina. The amazing Mandy Nolan, who's our Greens candidate for the federal seat of Richmond, a comedian and Northern Rivers local, and our soon-to-be newly appointed Greens Upper House MP and one of my Greens colleagues in the New South Wales Parliament, Sue Higginson, who is in public interest environmental lawyer, a Lismore local, and I like saying it, an MLC elect, because soon you are going to be an MLC. So tonight we are here because with the recent floods in northern New South Wales rendering thousands of homes unlivable, the climate crisis has created or escalated the housing crisis that we saw in this community. Housing was already hard to find and unaffordable for many, and now the situation is desperate and people are being forced into overcrowded housing with friends, parking caravans on their front lawns or living in makeshift shelters. Tonight, we are going to hear from these amazing Greens women who live up north in New South Wales, who are going to tell us what it's like to be at the front line of the intersection between what is a climate and a housing crisis. We're going to talk about how it's impacted their communities, and we're also going to see how everyone has been responding to the unfolding disasters, as well as what we can all collectively do to try and fix it. So I want to thank you all first and foremost for joining us. You are no doubt overwhelmed and exhausted by the amount of incredible work you have been doing in your community. So I guess first up, before we kind of get into the nitty gritty of it, like, how are you going? How are you doing, Tamara?
Thanks, Jenny, and thanks so much for hosting this, and hi to everyone here. Look, I just want to say it's terrible for in my electorate. You know, there's 600 homes gone just in the Ballina Shire, and of course we know right across the Northern Rivers. So my heart goes out to everyone who has been impacted, and we've all been affected. And I really look forward to hearing people's thoughts about the way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Tamara. It's been amazing to see you out and about, and I always feel so wonderful to know that there's someone with your care out there in the community looking out for your community and beyond. How are you doing, Mandy? How are you holding up?
I have to say it's been quite a ride for a lot of us. This is really very unnavigated territory at this level. I guess I think a lot of people are suffering from what I'd call flood fatigue. People are tired, people are frustrated, people are wanting to know what's next. That's where we are right now. We're looking for solutions. We're having to slow down and have conversations. So you know, we're hanging in there. We're survivors. We are resilient. The community has just been amazing. And, but yeah, I think people are tired this week. Everyone's really exhausted.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, everyone's hearts is sharing every time I share anything about what's been happening where you guys are. It's just everyone's hearts goes out with a high level of care and a desire to want to do whatever we can. So how are you doing, Sue?
Yeah, look, I'm going well. But yeah, as Mandy and Tamara have said, the scale of it is really hard to convey. You know, we sort of are seeing the snapshots of a piece here and a piece there. I had the opportunity to travel through the whole floodplain this week, you know, from Lismore down the floodplain and back up. The scale and the magnitude is barely fathomable, you know, and I'm talking from I'm one of the lucky ones, I still have a home. But the scale is unbelievable. So just travelling down, the stench of rotting carcasses still, the fish kills on the beach, houses that were on little hills on the floodplain are now further down the paddock somewhere else. And then Lismore town and the urban areas of South and North Lismore, you know, I had over the years people talking about the climate crisis, climate change, and oh, the apocalypse. I can assure you that right now, that's the centre of Lismore and the north and south of Lismore is nothing short of the centre of an apocalypse. That's the only way I can describe it and explain it. Whilst clearly we don't have shells and bombs dropping on us, that's actually what it looks like. That's the result. The catastrophe is unfathomable. But yeah, as everyone's communicated, there's an incredible community spirit.
Totally. I mean, so it's so powerful to hear you describe, because you can hear almost from the tone of your voice rather than anything else. And I think this is the challenge. The scale of things is so hard to fathom when we look at everything on screens or how we get a sense of it. Tamara, I know that you've been on the ground basically like providing a link, right? A connection between emergency services, between housing, temporary accommodation, between people who can't get access to others, between your local community and what's needed to happen at a government level to be able to ensure support. I wonder, can you describe a bit like what you're seeing there from flood affected communities right now, and where you see the highest levels of need are at the moment, the biggest priorities?
Yes, and I've put my stopwatch on, so I only do 4 minutes. Look, I just wanted to start by saying that we know that social infrastructure and social capital are the things that, you know, and our communities and how we communicate with each other and care for each other it's well documented all over the world that in terms of rescue and recovery, it's essential. And what we saw is that we're very intact in terms of our social infrastructure. And, you know, overwhelmingly. But we've got hollowed out communities in terms of agencies and supports from government over many, many years, hollowed out communities, and that gentrification and stark differences between the highly affluent and people with low socioeconomic background. And unfortunately, a legacy of inappropriate developments, you know, developments that local communities have not been able to stand up to the government to say we shouldn't be building in the floodplains and we shouldn't be doing inappropriate development in terms of the climate crisis. So, you know, and as well, you know, documented, the housing crisis was at a peak. So unfortunately, you know, what's keeping me awake at night is the people who are in those evac centres. You know, they're the pointy end. They're people who were already highly vulnerable, mostly, and already facing an uncertain future on a daily basis in terms of low socioeconomic backgrounds. So now, 600 homes in my electorate, you know, and that'll be repeated. You know, we're looking at probably 3,000 plus homes across the 3 electorates. So, with the already peak
Tamara,
crisis.
just repeat that, because I feel like it doesn't give people a sense of the scale, because I think that's it, right? You were just saying, like, you know, that's huge, right?
Yeah, so and that was incorrect. just in Ballina Shire, right, which is
Yeah.
the town of Wardell, and that it was impacted, Wardell, Pimlico, the West Ballina, South Ballina, and parts of Ballina. So just that, 600 homes. And then in the north, we haven't got those figures yet, but it's likely to be something similar. Where Sue is in Lismore, it's going to, so we're talking, the estimates at the moment are 3,000 to 4,000 homes.
Yeah.
Now, so we already had as a major lack of rental accommodation of any sort, record land prices and house prices. So, there were women living in cars before this, they've lost their cars. You know what I mean? So it's in terms of my major focus is the housing and mental health. And again, mental health services bare bones. And the government's thrown some money at it, but it's not going to work unless we actually have humans. So it's just and then in terms of adaptation to climate change, we're living in that catastrophic impacts experience, and it's hard to talk about. People are just trying to survive from life and death, basically.
Yeah. And Tamara, I think the point you raise is so crucial, right? Is that people are feeling this, and maybe Sue, I'll just on the back of that, I'll come to you. Like this is about climate adaptation now, right? This is about the climate emergency in the realities of the local communities where you're living. Now, you've worked as a public interest environmental lawyer, Sue, for many years and around issues of climate change. For those that don't know, the IPCC handed down its most recent report into climate change and during this recent flood crisis. And one of the things that was one of the main takeaways of that report was basically that climate change is already here and that we are already seeing impacts. The report states, and I'll quote it, it is unequivocal that climate change has already disrupted human and natural systems. I mean, that sounds like strong language. It's pretty strong language, but it's also the reality. Sue, you wrote a piece in The Guardian recently addressing the climate crisis in relation to the floods. I mean, how do you see this playing out on the ground for those people whose lives and livelihoods are being affected, and making the link between what is devastation caused by these floods and human-induced climate change and the displacement occurring as a result of that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely where we're at. There's absolutely no shadow of doubt that this is a climate change induced weather event. So I think it's really important to break it down a bit. This is not a flood. We've had floods in Lismore and the Northern Rivers region for as long as we know. And when I say that, we've been recording flood levels since colonisation, but what we know is traditional owners of this land have been passing down stories and histories that this area has always flooded. Floods as big as the flood we have seen this time, perhaps. This was not a flood. What happened here was actually an extreme disastrous weather event. It was called a cut-off low. It was a low pressure system, unlike we have seen. It was an extreme weather event that caused a catastrophic flood. So it's really important to understand the difference and the breakdown there. We've known floods, we've had flood communities. As I said in my piece in The Guardian, ordinarily for a flood, we will go in a tinny from veranda to veranda and we will check on those people, see if they're okay. We'll laugh a bit because there'll be a goat or a chook or whatever on the veranda with all the people, and we'll share a beer and then we'll go to the next veranda. This time we were people in tinnies, risking their lives, saving lives amongst the screams and wails and howls of people on roofs, petrified, grasping onto their lives. This is what climate change extreme weather events look like. So there is no doubt that this is what the science has been saying. So the idea of the IPCC reports, if we look to them at the moment, we will see that over the past few decades, there's been incredible chapters on adaptation and what we need to do. And as our community here in the Northern Rivers, we now need to pioneer adaptation. Resilience is a really interesting concept and it's a good concept, but resilience is where we talk about building back, repairing the damage, staying strong and continuing on. We can't do that this time. We need to engage in the narrative and the tools of adaptation. And it is different to resilience. We need to fortify against the harms and the damages. We know what that looks like now. We've seen it. The fact that not more life was lost is a bit of a miracle. And we know that it's testament to actually people locally on the ground risking their lives and saving other people's lives. If it wasn't for them, if it was down to public institutional response, it would have failed. It would have been a catastrophic failure. So there's plenty. We know what adaptation looks like. It will include some forms of relocation where people want to do that. And we need to have now that very honest conversation about that. But that conversation has to be backed up with financial support, emotional support, and security for the people who are brave enough to stand in the face of this and say, yep, I'm ready to relocate. And that's one step. There's a whole toolbox around adaptation, and I can talk to that a bit later.
Yeah, and I think just on that, so I think that's the other real challenge, is empowering communities to be able to make those informed choices where they are supported to be able to make those informed choices, not being forced into being relocated or displaced as a result of no alternative option because the financial support isn't there, the other sorts of supports and services aren't there. And, you know, hearing you talk about that makes me think about, you know, the discussions that we have where we talk about people being evicted for other circumstances, right? And there are ways that you can relocate people that provide them with the level of respect and dignity they deserve, and a recognition that actually losing the security of your home, losing the security of your neighborhood and your community is a hugely traumatic event. And so recognizing the trauma associated with that and how you give people the dignity and empower them to be able to make the choice they want to in where they move next or how they move or what support they need is so critical, right? We talk about that in different places. This is now talking about how we talk about this in the context of this kind of extreme weather displacement. Mandy, I mean, in addition, and I feel like usually when we get to chat, Mandy, we get to be so funny and it's always so chatty, and I feel like it's not that, but you know, in addition to being an amazing comedian, you are like so well known up north. I've been watching all of the amazing comments on every time you post anything. People are like, Mandy, what do we do about this? Mandy, what do we do about that? You're being constantly asked as a font of knowledge and a connection to the community about how people can help, what can happen. I mean, I know you are a long-term advocate for affordable housing, for renters' rights. I know that you've got a lot to say about polluting coal as well. I wonder, we know that like the homelessness situation in the Northern Rivers is huge, right? In Northern Rivers has 37% of the state's homelessness population, but only 4% of the state's overall population. These are disturbing figures when people usually are looking to the likes of Newtown and the inner city as being where we need to focus on rough sleeping and homelessness, when in actual fact, this is a crisis that goes across the state. I wonder, I mean, tell us about the sort of severity of the current crises you're seeing. I mean, you're seeing it up close. What do you feel like people are coming to you with? What do you feel like the solutions are? And just before you answer, Mandy, I was just going to say, we're going to put in the chat as well, because I know some people that are listening are really in need of direct help and support now. So we're going to put in some links to like the Tenants Union and others so that people can actually get that housing support if they need it. But yeah, over to you, Mandy.
Thank you. And I very much, Jenny, I just have to apologise if it's a bit noisy. I'm in Nimbin, not at home. And one of the reasons I'm here tonight is because one of the impacts that you see from flood is like the flood after the flood is straight after this, I'm performing at a fundraiser for a domestic violence service. It had been cancelled, but we reinstated it because the demand on DV services and those kind of out support services is going through the roof, because that's the kind of stuff that happens after a disaster like this. People lose a lot of safety, and it's not just around the immediate housing, it's all that safety that sits around. So we're seeing that definitely. We had, we've got a 15-year deficit in our need for housing in our region, which we've been talking about. Every government that's come through has failed to address it. They've been hiding from it for a long time. Now, I'd say it's not even just an intersection of climate and housing, it's a collision. And it's created, you know, an enormous, it's the stress of loss, it's the stress of how you rebuild, and it's the emotional impacts of a profound loss of agency that people have over their lives. And in saying that, I have to acknowledge the First Nation communities in our region who are the most vulnerable, who have been hit the hardest, where whole communities, you know, like at Cabbage Tree Island, have had to relocate. There are big conversations to be had, and people need to be on the floor having them, and not having, I'm seeing a lot of decisions, you know, in a sense, people need to be part of the decision-making process. It's traumatizing, and that's where the support needs to be. We've always needed more housing. You know, now it's out of control. Like it's, I don't know how we're going to come back from this. The interim measures, we can come back though. I think we can use this as an opportunity to put in place what we knew should have been there 15 years ago. This is our chance to keep that conversation really loud and to make it happen. We don't want to see vulnerable communities put in interim housing where that's never changed, where that 1 to 2 years of housing goes on to 5 and 10 years. We have a real responsibility to not see that happen. We have to keep our community strong and pushing forward. Right now, the community is amazing. Although there are stories, like tenant stuff is, I worry about in our region all the time, because there's really great landlords and then there's absolutely exploited.
There are dodgy ones.
Like this one person I know, this is someone who made their place available for someone who had nowhere to go with their family. They've paid $11,000 for 3 weeks. Now that is absolute exploitation of vulnerable people that have nowhere to go.
In on the
and
crisis, right?
a lot of the short-term holiday lettings on those stay platforms, they've made themselves available. Oh, guess what? Until the date, the 9th of April. And what is the 9th of April? That is the day before Easter, before we have a massive tourist kind of influx. It is perplexing. It makes me really angry when you see the hardship people are going through. Friends of mine that are camping out at the moment because they've got nowhere to go. There's a lot broken and there's a lot wrong. There's a lot we can do about this, and we cannot lose this moment.
And I think, Mandy, you just saying, like, this is the thing, right? There is just so many stories, like all of you I've seen, you know, you hear it and you see so many stories of people being compassionate, caring, so generous, going above and beyond for people. And then there are the greedy bastards, like, let's be clear, who will just try and cash in on absolutely anything they can. And to me, that's where we need the government to step in, because we need clear policies, we need clear legislative and regulation guidelines to make sure that those people that are greedy, that are literally going to try and profit from this crisis, from this devastation, are not able to do so. And I think, Tamara, I mean, I'll come to you. We have compared over the years our various local communities' rental horror stories. You know, people focus on the challenges of renting a house in inner city Newtown, but there are many more challenges up in the community that you represent. These are not new challenges, right? These are issues that have been happening. The housing crisis up there was happening before this current crisis. I mean, you tell us a little bit about it. We've talked about it, but I mean, what do you think that the state government can be doing right now in terms of protecting renters particularly, but also protecting homeowners who are not able to live in their homes at the moment and for the first time in their life are having the experience of what it's like to be treated as a renter, which, you know, from all accounts is really not a good thing because of the way the system's stacked against renters and for landlords.
Yeah, I mean, I was a renter my entire adult life until I was elected, and I was a single mum. And, and back in my day, you know, what you experienced was, that you get kicked out at Christmas time. If you had a dog, when we came back from Broken Hill, 5 years in Broken Hill, we had a dog and a cat. You know what I mean? It was nigh impossible. So that, but that's a very long time ago. So now it is just next level. And you're seeing the massive gentrification of our region. And, you know, and sadly, a lot of people, the housing boom for in Lismore, a lot of those land values really, really went up. My electorate's completely unaffordable, but even Lismore, where people were moving to, they've paid a lot of money and then they've just lost their home, kind of thing. Look, we know that with COVID, we saw, Jenny, I mean, you led the charge. We had so many things that we were told could never happen, the sky will fall. Then suddenly they happened under COVID, no grounds eviction straight off the bat. I'm very pleased, you know, the Premier has announced, with us pushing them, announced those packages for renters right now. But the issue is there is nowhere to rent. So how do we incentivise, you know, 5,000 hosts roughly on house share platforms to actually put those properties on the long-term letting market? And that's number one. And then number two for me is, you know, the state instruments around affordable housing are not fit for their purpose. And we, you know, it's time. And I think, you know, coupling these two together I'm seeing a different perspective from ministers and the Premier. It's like, I think the penny has dropped, but it is, you know, so many people have fallen through the cracks for a very long time. And at the moment, it's catastrophic. And, you know, I keep getting told no idea is too reckless, you know, in terms of feeding that to the ministers and the Premier. But, you know, I keep saying you need to look at short-term holiday letting. We were banging on that door for so long, and do you now understand? And I think they're starting to, and I hope we see some movement with that.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, Sue, go for it, jump on in.
I was just jumping in on something Tamara said. I think one way to gauge the intensity of what happens from, you know, a real life experience can be well gauged by the Premier's response. For the first time that I can actually remember, we have a Liberal Premier who turned up and actually announced the long-term solution to this is in fact social and affordable housing. So he actually, the gravity of the problem that we face now. So we know we've got the 285 million in temporary housing support. We know that includes the rental support, which is fabulous for the demand, but it's not helping with supply. Obviously, that's what Tamara's raised. It's like, yep, great, we've got 16 weeks rent if you can find a house. Well, there isn't one. So we've got the motorhomes that are arrived. I'm seeing them around the joint. I can see them. People are grabbing them, and they're appropriate for some people in terms of the temporary space. We've got the pods, recreational camps. There's a few around the region. They're being decked out and made ready for family appropriate camping type immediate solutions. But yeah, the Airbnb solution is something that clearly needs more work. I don't think that's up and ready yet from what I'm hearing. And as Mandy and Tamara are saying, as soon as the holiday, what's available is so limited. But what we know is that we actually, so having the Premier make that realisation and that announcement, I think we seriously need to be nailing in, and I know that we are trying as Greens to nail in what it means to have that financial commitment now to what that looks like. We've got Social Futures, North Coast Community Housing, they've got their plans, they're on the table, they've been on the table now for years, but what they're begging for right now is let's get the financial commitment for these now while the crisis is upon us and is this escalated, so that in a few months, we haven't disappeared and the finance is there to back it up. So I think that that's what we need to be holding on to.
Yeah, and there are really, I mean, I think the fact that we're coming to this crisis on the back of what was the pandemic and seeing what was a huge crisis around rental housing and other issues around that. One of the big and disturbing lessons around this, and I think this is absolutely true, Tamara, and we saw it, you know, the level of willingness for a conservative government to step in. Well, even at a federal level, we saw it, right? All of a sudden, we had basically a short period of time where people were getting an adequate income when they were on income support, as opposed to the cruel levels that they were being put on before. In New South Wales, basically for a short period of time in Sydney, we solved homelessness and rough sleeping. Everyone was provided with wraparound services and support. Even non-citizens were given access to this housing and support. Then what happened? They just stopped it, and they literally just knew how to solve this problem and then just stopped funding it. And I think that what we need to do, and I think you're right, Sue, in bringing that point up, is that we need to be looking at what are the longer term solutions to this. But there are some immediate fixes, and, you know, to hold them to it, Tamara and I, we're back in the Parliament next week. You know, we're drafting right now a bill to amend the Residential Tenancies Act to basically put a hold on evictions in the flood impacted areas for 12 months, to put a cap on rents so that no one can have a rent increase for the next 12 months. Because we know what will happen. Those dodgy landlords that Mandy was just talking about, they'll fix up the properties, they'll put in new bathrooms and new kitchens because there's no choice, because they were damaged, and then they'll up the rents so that no local family can afford to pay the rent anymore. So we want to put a cap on rents, which we think is completely reasonable. And we also want to see an end to no grounds evictions, and a recognition that mold, which is impacting across the state, not just in the flood impacted areas or for renters, is actually included as one of the urgent things around being fit for habitation. Because I think if they're committed to it, then we get that in legislation now. And if they want to vote that down, then all of their words about caring about these communities mean nothing if they're not willing to put it in enforceable legislation and take a stand on the community side as opposed to the landlords. Now, we've got lots of time. We've had lots of time to be able to chat and ask questions. Before I throw to others to pull out their questions from the chats on the Facebook Live and on the Zoom, thank you for wherever it is that all of you are joining us from. I guess I wanted to, you know, I'm going to go off script a bit. I just wanted to put some words out there for you and get you all to have a bit of a rant, because I feel like you're all being very measured. I feel like you're giving me your good stance on all the things we need. And I just want to say a few words and get you to have a little rant about them. Those words are Scott Morrison, coal, housing crisis, and mold. Mandy, I'm going to go to you first. Oh, you're muted, darling. Hang on.
I just
Yeah,
unmuted
you're good now.
myself.
We've got you. Go.
There you go. Oh my God. The other things that make you really angry, it's really, you know, that will give you a blood pressure problem thinking about all those things together. You know, the direct relationship between coal, Morrison, housing crisis. And let's not forget, you know, right through this, you know, it's in where his heart is a big lump of coal, obviously. This complete lack of compassion. That's something Sue and I talked about when he turned up for his press conference in Lismore, which was nothing more than, you know, propaganda, basically, to get his message out, you know, to his electorate at that point, that he knew that he could win because it's a coalition seat. But, you know, not speaking to the people there, not having any relationship to actually see these are the people that you represent. They needed a leader on that day that cared about what has happened to them. There is such a profound lack of caring. And what's happened to our region, I have to say, is on the back of a property boom where people went nuts with the amount they could actually earn. And let's not forget what happened to our rental market and what happened to our housing stock, because our region just went out of control with the amount of people sort of buying. Our market was going up, 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 up. And there was no way they were pulling back on that. It was absolute opportunism for anyone who was in that investment market. Shows why we need to end negative gearing, because these little communities, we don't have huge amounts of land to push into to create affordable housing. We have housing. It's just being used for speculation. It's being used as a commodity. And I'd have to say the way our housing is used, it's the same way we treat, you know, our what's happening with mining, basically. Our real estate sort of market is like a coal industry. It's got the same approach, you know, and homelessness, well, that's our court's lung.
Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. Sue, you were so eager to jump in. Go on.
I'm glad I took a deep breath. Thanks, Mandy. You saved me from all sorts of things that I could have
Oh my
been
gosh, now I'm so
thinking of myself
disappointed.
about.
That's exactly what I wanted. I'm going to give Sue some random trigger words in a minute. Oh,
No, I don't know, really. Look, it was, as Mandy said, it was absolutely shocking when he showed up and the community gathered. And yeah, there were some angry dissenters there, and they just wanted, but there was also some women with children who just came to be heard, to tell their story, and he just wasn't there. And it was pretty sad. It was incredibly sad and very disappointing. But on the other hand, what I'm actually seeing is because we have a community that is in no doubt that this is a climate change induced impact that we're suffering from, there is a heightened awareness and a heightened anger, but also a mobilised activism is taking place and engagement in this. So from where it sits, yes, we've been talking about housing and adaptation, but we must never forget that we still have so much work to do on the mitigation front. You know, there's some 70 coal and gas projects in the pipeline across Australia still. We're literally, only last week, the New South Wales Department of Planning has once again recommended a new a new big expansion to a coal mine project, and this is notwithstanding everything that everyone knows. It was only 3 days ago, Scott Morrison said in the media when Susan Ley had won her appeal against the children's future about a duty of care to young people to protect them from harm and death and climate change into the future, that he's made it very clear that we're not afraid, as in his government is not afraid to basically hand over or relinquish Commonwealth environmental approval powers, and will take the path of the mining companies. That's where we're going to rest and vest our environmental regulation scheme. We're going to follow them. So, I mean, I am furious. Many people are furious. I don't think the fury is going to go away. I think it's going to rise. We know we need to see a change in May. If we don't get a change in May, the conversation is going to be incredibly difficult. I don't know how we have that conversation after May. And yeah, so it is. I think people need to remember that coal and gas is still there. And in fact, coal right now, for all of the awful reasons of the war in the Ukraine, the price of coal has just skyrocketed. We're actually talking, some coal mines are looking at reopening that haven't been open since 2005. This is actually, we're heading into catastrophic territory in that, I mean, we're already in it, but we're further stepping into it. So I'm absolutely begging everybody everywhere to please realise we thought we had made some significant gain in the coal sphere, but unfortunately, Australia is actually talking about profiting out of the disadvantage and the war that's taking place, and once again, through our coal mines and through those incredibly unscrupulous, unethical companies that are knocking on the government door saying, hey, just give us more approvals, we'll keep mining. Your commitment to zero emissions is not till 2050, so we can keep mining coal. So please maintain your fury against fossil fuels, because we've got such a long road ahead, and we've got to bring it in.
I think that's so true around trying to maintain the focus, because there is so much going on, right? And I just want to acknowledge, like you referred to what is happening in the Ukraine right now. There is still a pandemic happening. The global pressures and realities beyond climate change are significant and real. The fact that, you know, before this pandemic hit, I know that we spoke to our community. Everyone was saying the only thing we can talk about for the next 5 years is the climate emergency and what we are doing to act on it. And then we all got hit with a global pandemic, and it's very hard in the middle of that to mobilize and activate in a way that you're also focused on all these other things. Power to those young students who took that action, and to the student strike for a call out for that on the 25th of this month. Tamara, I'm going to come to you in terms of, you know, feel free to jump off those trigger words or what Mandy and Sue have said. But yeah, I mean, you know, we feel the rage all the time, right?
I want to kind of, because I feel like I'm living in a sci-fi in the last, like everyone probably. I read a lot of science fiction, and I think that my hope and belief, I weirdly with those trigger words, I go to hope, and for me, I think that things can change on a dime, and what I mean is the psyche of humanity, and I believe that it will happen fast, and it will sweep out anyone that is in the way of what needs to be done. It's taking way too long, but I think it is going to happen, and it's going to happen fast, because what we just experienced was, I think, for a lot of people, the penny has dropped, and including, as we've said, the Premier, ultra conservative Premier. I was standing behind him when he said the words, "We have to plan for worst possible scenarios." So he's immediately dispensed with the normal way of talking about events like this. So, coming back to like communities being able to say to the precautionary principle to be something that we can actually deliver, and look at, and like West Byron, I'm just going to say it, West Byron, there's going to be, it's the sink of Niagara. And so the amount of fill that they're going to want to put in now after this, Ballina Council has a rule of 2 metre fill. It'll be insane in there. So
yeah,
how do we? It's like, so I've got complete faith in humanity is just going to flip. But in the meantime, we just, it just does our head in, because we're just seeing things. It just goes round and round. So ScoMo is clueless. Coal is killing us. And how mold, and my office, we were homeless from our office, not that it matters, but for a year, because of black mold, which we've been putting up with for 7 years in an electric office.
Totally. And this is, I mean, Tamara, like, I love, I love that you bring hope out of that, because I feel like there is a sense that it's like the more extreme the situation, the more the denialists just can't win, right? The more they just can't deny when it is right there in your face. The ability to deny it is happening is much harder. And I think, it's huge power to you for all that you've been doing locally, like supporting people that live in your area directly, but also like actually spending time going around with the people that are up there in your region, all the ministers, the Premier, everyone visiting, to make sure that they're hearing and seeing the real story and can't get away with having a little photo up and moving on, because you're there being able to go, oh, and this and this, and this is what we said 2 years ago, and this was the concern we had in this thing, and being able to give them the solutions there. That is like really powerful stuff. We've got some questions. I wanted to go to them. The first one that I wanted to ask about was basically a concern that people have around the idea of, flood affected communities being moved onto rural lands, that Lismore's got a policy around that, Tweed Council doesn't yet, and also any ideas or initiatives that any of you have heard from locally about rural landowners who might want to take on a couple of caravans on their properties or other sort of temporary options. Sue, maybe I'll go to you first. You were giving enthusiastic nods then.
Yeah. Look, I mean, speaking, say, for Lismore, and Lismore is actually one of the most constrained LGAs in terms of environmental constraints and lack of land to release. We actually do have some shovel-ready lands that would be appropriate for housing. But what I think the solution is to that is actually the federal and state government needs to purchase those lands. We need to go, I hate to say this because I know it's quite unappealing, but we actually need to take a step back to that model of how we do housing. We used to have public authorities buy lands and develop them for social housing. So we need to take that step back, but whilst doing that, we need to take a massive leap forward. So the idea is we have federal and state government purchase those lands so they're not purchased by private developers. We do that now. Then we develop those lands sensitively so that these lands are already lands that have been assessed as being appropriate for private developers to develop. Let's grab them back now before they get more competitive, because right now they are more competitive right now because we've just lost a whole area in terms of future further or existing development. So absolutely we do that. Then what we do is we bring forward the that protects those rural lands which people might be eyeing off opportunistically, which we can't afford to lose from the rural production of those lands. They're really important land for food security, and so on. We then, in concert with the purchase of those lands, we start looking at adaptive building and do it sensibly. But in terms of the whole region, there are provisions within existing planning laws to be able to have temporary accommodation, whether it's putting vans on rural lands, etc. In Lismore, we actually have a provision in our LEP that on rural lands, you are allowed a secondary dwelling on that land without much to do and without taking rural land out of production. So things like that, we absolutely can do.
Yeah, and I think that this is the thing, Mandy, I'll come to you. I just noticed that question was from Rini, and Rini's just sort of saying in the chat, but what about opening up the space for more flexibility about having, you know, caravans and on rural properties? But Mandy, I'll come to you. Feel free to jump on in.
I think something, I was at a meeting the other day around a lot of people that work in the space of running festivals. And I think it's something to realise one of the great skills and what we're really doing at the moment in our regions, because it's being so community led, is working to the strengths of our community and holding events where we can take care of people on large spaces where there's, you know, toilets and showers, etc. is actually possible. We do have festival sites. One of them, you know, some of the bigger ones went under, but we have the skills in how to actually manage that. And we do have, you know, there's caravan parks that, you know, throughout our region. I would say, you know, our rural lands, as we're talking about, are you know, at risk once you start sort of, you know, sort of staying on rural land, you know, it puts at risk, I'd say, in that for a lot of the kind of the protections that are set up there for those areas. And we don't, you know, we're already in a climate crisis. We don't want to be impinging on delicate, you know, so much has happened too in this flood event to wildlife and to the animals in our region. And we have to acknowledge what's happened, you know, in our natural environment as well. So I think we have some options, and I'm saying short term, this is interim, and we have to really set strong boundaries about what we mean by short term, that it cannot go. So, you know, we do have festival sites, we have capacity, we have skills, we know how to provide a kind of pop-up village, as it were, in our region.
Totally. You just saying that, Mandy, just reminded me, it was the incredible community, like some of the arts community, the way they responded to the pandemic in terms of being able to, you know, there was this incredible set design company that pivoted and then started making like flat pack desks that you could put together and then pack down within a day because people had no space to be able to work from home stuff. Like the creative arts and events industry have been through so much, and then the fact that those people are having the expertise that we can rely on, like a massive shout out to that, because I think, you know, if there's anyone that's been hit multiple times by the recent crises, that those communities have been hit really, really hard. Tamara, I was going to come to you. There's a couple of things that I was going to just put out as questions and then let everyone kind of have a crack at the ones they want to, if you like. Dan has been asking about whether there's a plan put together about making more demands for housing in regional communities and how we make sure that those houses are not then gobbled up by the wealthy landlords or people that have multiple properties. Greta's asking about the fact that in her council area, they're not even willing to accept there is a climate emergency, but is starting to think about resilience, and maybe is there a way to build on the idea of communities that are talking about adaptation and mitigation. And then Robin is sort of saying, do we have enough developed land already? She's not an expert, or they're not an expert, but it seems like there's many apartments just sitting empty, at least their perspective. And the other comment from Sally was around like movable or semi-independent spaces used in the country with shipping containers, demountables. What does that look like? And then Kayla's talking about using the housing SEP for, you know, dealing with the short-term rental crisis that we are currently dealing with, that Tamara and I have been talking about for many years around changing the planning mechanisms. I think we might get some movement on that soon. I'm throwing all those out there because I'm aware that we've got about 9 minutes to go and we need to wrap. So I've put those as all ideas in your head. I'm just going to come to you first, Tamara, and then come back around to you, Mandy, and then Sue, and then we'll need to wrap it up. So go for it, Tamara.
Yeah, look, I think I'll just dive into Dan's because it's such a bugbear of mine. You know, the Liberals and trickle down, you know, lovers talk about the supply. It's all supply. It's all I've heard in the last 7 years, 8 years. And as we know, that you can't, like, when you've got the speculative market as it is, the market will not deliver affordable, safe, secure housing. And any country that's worth its salt has rent control and community housing standards. And as Sue says, you know, that's basically it's a fundamental human right, as we always talk about. So, you know, until we actually can rein in the short-term holiday market in our area, and if we can't, as Sue said, we have to actually earmark and put aside that residential land now, because I've just watched so much. You know, when I first got elected, they said you should have no more development east of the highway, right? But then I didn't realise there was so much banked already that was then, you know, and is now being developed. And so communities have just completely lost control of what happens. So just, you know, closing remark to say that I believe we are on the brink of massive social change, and that we're going to be, I think it's very exciting because we're going to be talking about things very differently. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara, and I love your optimism about that. I really, really do. Mandy, I'll come to you if I can.
Yes, of course. And I love the way Tamara does that. I'm always led by her ability, and it's true, to actually see the opportunity that we have, because we need to move forward and we need to see, you know, how are we going to build better? How are we going to build forward and make ourselves, you know, more robust? It's absolutely true. We've been talking about the short-term holiday letting market for a long time, and of course we were going to end up here. You know, what it's done to our market, you know, affordable housing in our region is floodable housing, because that's just where, you know, you can afford housing in an area that's not covered by insurance. It's the way it happens here. So this push for social and community housing has had to happen for a long time, has to happen now. I also this week I went into Huon Brook and the Wanganui Valley, and I really want to acknowledge the particular challenges that are faced by people that live in rural communities out of town, who didn't experience flood but experienced horrific landslides, and that those communities require very specific support and rebuild as well, being often those communities still cut off, you know, tons and tons of soil, cutting them off from having any access to getting out. You know, the impacts, you know, and like Sue said, until you go there, it's hard to even get your head around what the impact is like. And, you know, these are areas that were impacted by fires, that when, you know, huge amount of rain hits, landslides have come away. We have to keep having this conversation around climate, around how we build strong, connected communities, and what we can do to make those communities ready to mitigate what's happening right now, but also so they're ready, you know, to operate when something happens, so they can communicate. There's a lot of very at-risk people when there's no communication, when there's water coming through, flood, landslides. So moving forward, absolutely got to get regulations on short-term holiday letting. And we can't also let the stories and what's happening to people in our hill regions go off the radar, because they kind of are a little bit. So we have to sort of keep reaching out to them as well.
Thank you so much, Mandy. It's so wonderful to hear how connected you are to the community. I hope that we find you in a position where you're sitting next to Adam Bandt in that lower house, and that Scott Morrison is sitting on the opposition benches by the end of May. That will make me happy. That will make so many people happy.
Yeah, the ute I was in the other day going on these roads I went, wow, it was terrifying.
Yeah. No, I think sitting in the same chamber of some of those politicians might be more terrifying than that, just to be honest. Yep. But thank you so much, Mandy. I also just want to acknowledge that Sally's asking in the chat, and it's really good to sort of say people are asking around whether people want help and people coming up to support the region and how that works. I think it's a really good point, Sally, and I think it's probably really dependent on the area. I was going to say, if people are interested in that, I reckon Tamara and Sue and Mandy will be able to jump on and actually respond to the chat, because I think it's a genuine question, like, what can we do to help? They'll post it on the comments on our Facebook live chats from this discussion. What can people do to help? Do they want people up there? Do they not want people up there? How can people support the local community? What are we pushing for? And we'll make sure we pull that together and send it to everyone that's been able to join us for this discussion, because I think that's going to be a real challenge in terms of the coming months, depending on where people are at and where the different communities are at. But Sue, we've got about a minute and a half to wrap up. So you've got a minute of that. I've got 30 seconds. Go for it.
Yeah, look, in terms of those final, trying to address some of those questions, we really do have to just muscle up and talk about regulation. We actually do need regulatory tools. As you said, Jenny and Tamara, that relying on the private sector to sort such a fundamental issue that relates to care, compassion, empathy, human rights, safety, mental health, families' futures, all of that. The private market just is not going to be able to cut it, and when the evidence is clear. So we do need to bring in some regulatory tools. And I know that for so long, the neoliberalist economic project has told us that regulatory tools are just not good and trendy and cool, but they're actually the only thing that is going to, they're one of the fundamental things that we need. As soon as we've got regulatory tools, then the private market can play according to the regulatory tools. And that's what we actually need to do. And we need to, as I say, we actually need to muscle up to make that happen. And we're going to do that. I do think that this catastrophe is going to provide, and has already provided, the leverage. The Northern Rivers has pioneered on so many fronts of innovation and sort of traversing new territory. We're up for it. We're good for it. We want to be the showcase. We want to be the pilot, and we want to work and scream to the hills about what it's going to take. In terms of the one thing somebody mentioned about that, embracing the temporary nature of things, I actually think that's going to come in our CBD of the Lismore area, because it's the most flood prone, and people are realizing we can't save it, we can't rebuild it the same. However, you can't remove a community that doesn't want to go. I think we're going to see some real innovation there, whether it's this turning a CBD into a living marketplace that is can be packed up and packed down, whether it is these movable retail outlets that can be trailered in, trailered out. We want to be trusted to have that innovation, and we need to have the support to do that. So yeah, we've got, and the real terms here are the recovery cannot be a sprint here. There's some sprinting involved, but we're on a marathon here, all of us together, and we need everyone.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Sue. And can I just say a massive thank you to all three of you for taking the time to talk. There are so many people that have been wanting to connect in, to hear directly from you, to know what's going on, to feel like they're part of what is happening, that they can hear the solutions, what's been happening on the ground for your communities. I know we've got people that have joined us that are directly impacted, that are living this now. For those of you who are on Zoom, something just popped up on your screen in a really kind of intense way. That's just a small poll, so we know how you're doing, how you connected with us. But what I wanted to do is just finally say thank you so much to everyone that has joined us. I know that some people have joined us and they are living this devastation right now. I know that others have joined us because they have family and close connection to the countries and the areas where this devastation has occurred, and that there are others that have solidarity with communities that have been displaced or are suffering because of the housing crisis, and others like all of us who are dedicated, committed climate activists who want to see the world changed for the better and an end to the profit motives in housing and a genuine commitment to addressing the climate crisis that is upon us. Tamara, Mandy, Sue, you are wonderful humans. I am so proud to be in a party with you, to have your levels of compassion, intelligence, dedication, and commitment to the community. And I am just in awe of your power and strength. So thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your stories. And I will no doubt speak to you all very, very soon.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all. Good night. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks so much, everyone.